Dawn had barely broken when the plains turned pale with mist, the wind dragging low across the ground, carrying the scent of dry earth and damp hay. And through that chill light came the sound of bare feet pounding the hard soil. A thin young woman was running as if the horizon itself were pulling her forward. Her name was Layla Rowan, 19 years old. Her small feet split and bleeding from stones and thorns, streaks of red mixing with the dust of the frontier. She didn't look back, yet she knew the shapes behind her were growing closer, could hear the creak of saddles, the crack of reins, and the voice of the man whose anger had filled her childhood. That was her father and her two brothers, their horses cutting the morning silence in half. Lila crossed a patch of low ground, thick with reeds, breath sawing in and out of her chest, every step like stepping on glass. The only thought burning through the fog of exhaustion was to keep going, to get away from the reek of whiskey and sweat, from eyes that saw her as property, from the root cellar where she had learned how long a single day could last. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back, a memory of her mother's gentle hands, and a small flicker of will that refused to die even when everything else had been stripped away. Behind her, her father's voice cracked across the prairie, ordering her to stop, to come back, to end this foolishness. Lila clenched her jaw and veered toward a cluster of cottonwoods, praying the tangle of roots would hide her trail. Wind tore at her ash-blonde hair, whipping strands across her face, and the salt of sweat stung her lips, a reminder that she was still alive, still her own. She stumbled over a root, skinned her knee, then forced herself upright again. Then through the rising thunder of hooves, another sound broke in a voice, low and steady, not shouting but clear enough to reach her. It came from her left, deep and calm, carrying none of the cruelty she had learned to fear. She turned and saw a horseman emerge from the scrub, tall in the saddle, face half-shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were the color of the sky just before rain. The chestnut under him moved with the easy power of a creature that trusted its rider completely. The man extended a gloved hand, sure and unhurried. He told her if she wanted to leave this place, to take his hand and not look back. Lila hesitated for the smallest part of a heartbeat. Then her father's curses flared behind her and the choice vanished. She leapt, caught his wrist, and in one swift pull felt herself lifted off the ground and onto the saddle before him. The horse lunged forward, the world blurred into motion, and the wind became a river roaring in her ears. The man's arm circled her waist, steady as the rhythm of the gallop. He said his name was Noah Vale, a hand from Ridge Hollow Ranch, out early to check the fence line when he'd heard shouting. The horse, Ember, was quick and sure-footed. He bent low over the mare's neck, guiding her through a dry wash and into the wind so their scent would scatter. Lila couldn't speak at first. Her throat was raw, her heart still hammering from fear and the strange closeness of the man behind her. When words came, they were soft and hoarse. Lila Rowan. She said she couldn't go back. Not ever. Noah didn't press for details. He only said that no one chasing another soul for pain's sake deserved to catch them, then pointed Ember toward a narrow gully flanked by scrub oaks. By the time the sun cleared the low ridge, they had ridden for what felt like hours. Lila's head rested against the saddle horn, her pulse beginning to settle, her body learning the rhythm of the horse. She began to notice things: the smell of leather and horse sweat, the faint spice of tobacco from Noah's coat, the creak of the stirrups. Each detail told her this man was used to long roads and silence, not the kind of man who played at heroics. When at last he drew rein, a small cabin stood ahead beneath 3 gnarled oaks. The door hung loose on its hinges, but the walls looked sound. Noah said it was an old line shack belonging to Ridge Hollow, unused, stocked with a few staples, a safe place to rest. He swung down and helped her dismount. Her feet hit the ground and fire shot up her legs. She swayed, dizzy with pain and relief, without a word. Noah caught her before she fell, lifting her as easily as if she weighed no more than a bundle of kindling. Inside, the shack was bare but clean: a small iron stove, a table and 2 chairs, a narrow cot, tools hanging neatly from the wall. No clutter, no smell of neglect. Noah set her in a chair and told her to stay put while he saw to Ember. His tone was calm, practical, the voice of a man who had spoken more to animals and weather than to people. Alone, Leela traced the grain of the table under her fingers, trying to convince herself she was really safe, that there wasn't a lock waiting to slide home behind her. She wanted to cry, but didn't. She had learned tears changed nothing. Noah returned with a bucket of water and knelt to build a fire. When the flames caught, he poured some into a basin, testing the warmth with a fingertip. He told her to lift her feet. His hands were rough and scarred, but when they touched her skin, they were careful, almost reverent. He washed away the dust and blood, plucked out the tiny thorns, poured a splash of clear liquor over the cuts, then wrapped them in clean cloth. The sting made her flinch, but the heat that followed eased the ache. While he worked, Lila found herself speaking haltingly at first, then faster. She told him about the cellar, about the marriage her father had arranged, about the nights that smelled of rot and whiskey, about how her mother's death had turned their home into a tomb. The words tumbled out like stones rolling down a hill, not to ask pity, but to make them real outside her head. Noah listened without interrupting when she fell silent. He said quietly that no one deserved such treatment and that she'd already done the hardest thing she'd run. He promised he wouldn't take her back. There was a woman at Ridge Hollow, he said, who managed the ranch house, a stern but kind soul who knew how to help a frightened girl find her feet again. There would be work, food, and a window that looked out over open grass instead of dirt walls. Lila stared at the small flame trembling inside the iron stove. Its light flickered across Noah's face and the rough boards of the cabin. For the first time in her life, she felt a fragile kind of stillness. She didn't know what waited beyond this day, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of chill that makes every sound carry. Lila woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. The thin blanket Noah had draped over her shoulders sometime in the night was still warm. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, but the steady rhythm of Ember shifting in the corral outside and the faint creak of Noah's boots moving around the cabin had lulled her into the first deep rest she'd known in years. When she opened her eyes, Noah was by the stove pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked different in daylight, still rugged but softer. Somehow the lines of fatigue visible around his eyes. He turned as if sensing her gaze. "Morning," he said simply, setting the cup near her. "You ought to drink something hot before we ride." "Ride," the word made her chest tighten. "Where to?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the cup to steal its warmth. "Ridge Hollow Ranch," Noah replied. "Folks there won't ask questions they don't need answers to. You'll be safe." Safe. It was a word she had long ago stopped believing in. She nodded anyway. After a small breakfast of biscuits and beans left from the night before, Noah packed the few supplies he had and helped her outside. Her feet throbbed the bandages already stained, so he fashioned crude shoes from strips of leather tied with rawhide. They looked awkward, but when she took a few steps, they held. They mounted up again, she in front on his arms steady around her waist. The plains stretched endless and gold under the rising sun, scattered with low mesquite and the occasional jackrabbit darting through the grass. For a long while neither spoke. The world around them was too wide for words. After an hour, Leela said quietly, "They'll come looking." Her father and brothers. Noah's jaw tightened against her shoulder. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll have a hard time tracking through the ridge country, and if they find Ridge Hollow, they'll find more than they bargained for." They rode on the silence between them, no longer uneasy but companionable. When they stopped at a creek to water, Ember Noah offered her a strip of jerky. She chewed slowly, watching his reflection ripple in the water. "Do you always help strangers like this?" she asked. Noah shrugged his eyes on the current. "I help when I can. Truth is my sister once ran away from a bad place too. She didn't make it." Something in his tone, flat but heavy, told her there was more pain there than he cared to speak aloud. She didn't press. She only said, "Then maybe helping me is her way of finding peace too." He gave a short nod, and for a long moment neither of them moved. A hawk circled overhead, and the world felt caught between breaths. By midday, the Ridge Hollow Ranch came into view, a wide valley dotted with oak and cottonwood. The main house 2 stories high with whitewashed walls, a windmill turning lazily beside a barn. Smoke curled from a chimney, a place that looked alive, not haunted. They rode up the long drive and a woman appeared on the porch. Gray hair pulled tight in a bun, hands on her hips. She had the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. "Noah Winters, what trouble have you brought me now?" she called. Noah smiled, dismounted, and helped Leela down. "Ma'am, this here's Lila Rowan. She's had a rough go of it. Thought maybe you could find her something useful to do till she finds her feet." "The woman, Mrs. Callahan." Noah introduced her, studied Lila from head to toe. The torn dress, the bandaged feet, the hollow eyes trying not to look frightened. Her expression softened. "Well, child, you look half-starved. Come inside. We'll see about food and a bath." Leela glanced at Noah, uncertain, but he nodded. "Go on," he said. "You'll be all right." Mrs. Callahan led her inside, and the scent of soap and baking bread wrapped around her like a blanket. She showed Lila to a small room off the kitchen with a bed neatly made and a window that looked out over the paddock. For the first time since she could remember, Lila closed a door, not to keep someone out, but simply because she could. Later that evening, Noah stopped by. Mrs. Callahan had given Lila a clean dress, a plain blue calico that hung a little loose, and her hair was still damp from washing. She looked different, still thin, still wary but alive in a way that made Noah catch his breath. "How's the foot?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Hurts less. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me," he said, leaning on the doorframe. "I just happened to be in the right place." "No," Lila replied softly. "You chose to stop. Most wouldn't have." For a moment the room felt smaller, filled with the quiet weight of everything unspoken. Then Mrs. Callahan's voice called from the hall. "Supper's on," and the moment broke like a twig underfoot. That night Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the ranch settling down, the clink of metal, the distant nicker of horses, the hum of crickets beyond the window. She thought of her father's voice shouting her name, of the cellar's darkness, and then of Noah's arm pulling her from the ground, of the promise in his calm tone. For the first time, her dreams were not filled with fear, but with the wide-open prairie under morning light and a horse running fast enough to leave the past behind. Days at Ridge Hollow soon began to take on a rhythm that Lila hadn't known was possible. Mornings came with the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen and the low murmur of men saddling horses in the yard. Mrs. Callahan rose before dawn, her voice carrying through the house like a steady drumbeat, organizing the cooks and stable hands, making sure every task found the right pair of hands. She set Leela to work with small things, at first peeling potatoes, mending torn sleeves, sweeping the wide plank floors. At night, when she sank onto the narrow bed that had been given to her, Lila would stare out the small window at the stars spread thick across the Texas sky. It was strange to sleep in a place where doors didn't lock from the outside. Stranger still to realize that she no longer startled at every sound. Sometimes she'd wake to the wind tapping gently at the shutters and think for a panicked moment that she was back home trapped again. But then she'd hear the faint laughter from the bunkhouse, the bark of one of the ranch dogs, and she'd breathe out, remembering where she was. Noah kept his distance at first. She saw him most often from across the yard, his broad shoulders bent as he loaded hay or checked the fence line. Sometimes he'd catch her looking, and she'd look away quickly, unsure what to do with the warmth that rose in her chest. When he did speak to her, it was with that same easy steadiness that had carried her through the ride from the plains. One afternoon, after a week at Ridge Hollow, he found her hanging laundry behind the kitchen. "You're mending quick," he said, nodding toward her bandaged feet. "How do they feel?" "Like they remember too much," she answered, smiling faintly. "The grass feels strange after running on dirt and stone." He chuckled, a low sound that seemed to settle in the air. "Grass'll grow on you. So will safety if you let it." She didn't know how to answer, so she just nodded. As days turned into weeks, Lila began to find her place in the house. Mrs. Callahan taught her how to mix bread dough, by feel how to plan meals for 20 men who could eat their weight in beans and biscuits, and how to stretch a small pantry through a bad season. The older woman didn't say much about Lila's past, only that a good cook and a steady hand were welcome anywhere. But sometimes when she caught Lila staring out the window too long, she'd quietly set a cup of tea beside her and rest a hand on her shoulder for just a moment. One evening, while the sun dropped behind the western ridge painting the world in orange and rose, Leela walked out to the corral. Noah was there brushing down Ember. He looked up when she approached but didn't speak, only handed her the brush. She hesitated, then took it. Ember flicked her ears, patient and curious. "She's beautiful," Lila said softly. Noah smiled. "She's fast too. Saved us both, I'd say." They worked side by side in silence for a while. When the horse's coat gleamed in the fading light, Noah leaned against the rail looking out across the fields. "You think you'll stay?" he asked at last. Lila followed his gaze to the far line of cottonwoods. "I don't know yet. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "There's always work and you do it well. Mrs. Callahan thinks you've got sense." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's been a long time since anyone thought that about me. You just needed a place where you could breathe." Noah said, his eyes soft but steady. Before she could reply, Mrs. Callahan's voice called from the porch. "Dinner's ready," and the spell of the moment broke. But as they walked back toward the house, Lila realized that something had shifted quietly, like the wind changing direction. That night, after everyone had eaten, she found herself sitting on the porch steps, the lantern beside her, throwing a small pool of light. Noah passed by, pausing when he saw her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much thinking," she admitted. "About home. About what comes next. I never thought that far ahead." He leaned on the railing, hat in hand. "Most folks out here don't. We just try to make tomorrow better than yesterday." She looked up at him, and for the first time the fear that had lived in her eyes since the day he found her seemed to fade. "That's enough for me," she said. "Tomorrow better than yesterday." He nodded, and in the silence that followed, the night seemed to hold its breath. For weeks that simple rhythm continued. Lila worked in the kitchen, helped mend clothes, even learned how to saddle a horse. Noah taught her small things: how to tell when a storm was coming, by the way the wind shifted; how to hold a rein so a horse trusted the pull; how to light a fire when the wood was damp. Their talks were never long, but each one lingered in her chest long after. Then one afternoon the peace shattered. She was hanging sheets in the yard when she heard the distant rumble of horses. Turning, she saw 3 riders approaching up the long path, her father and her brothers. Her breath caught. She dropped the wet sheet and ran for the house, heart hammering against her ribs. Mrs. Callahan was in the kitchen rolling dough. "They're here," Lila gasped. "My father, he's found me." The older woman's eyes hardened. "Stay inside, child," she said, wiping her hands. "I'll handle it." But Lila couldn't. As the hoofbeats drew closer, something inside her shifted from fear to resolve. She'd run once. She wouldn't hide now. She followed Mrs. Callahan to the porch, her hands trembling, but her chin lifted. Her father dismounted first, his beard unkempt, eyes red with anger and drink. "There you are, girl," he growled. "Get your things. You're coming home." Mrs. Callahan's voice was sharp and steady. "She's not going anywhere with you, Mr. Rowan." "This is family business," he barked. "Stay out of it." "She's under my protection," Mrs. Callahan said, folding her arms. "And under Ridge Hollows." The 2 men behind him, her brothers, shifted uneasily in their saddles. Her father's face darkened. "She's my daughter, my property. The law says so." A new voice came from behind them. "The law's got no patience for fathers who beat their daughters half to death." Noah walked up from the corral, calm but unyielding, a few ranch hands trailing behind him. His hand rested near the holster at his side. Mr. Rowan turned, recognizing him. "You took her," he spat. "Stole her right from under me." "I helped a woman running for her life," Noah said evenly. "And I'd do it again." The air hung heavy, the tension wound tight as wire. Mrs. Callahan stepped closer to Lila, ready to shield her if needed. The men behind Noah spread out, silent but firm. For a long moment no one moved. Then her father's lip curled. "You think you can keep her? You'll regret this." Lila stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Not now, not ever." "You ungrateful—" She cut him off. "I found something here you never gave me. Respect. Kindness. A life that's mine." Noah's voice broke the silence like a blade sliding back into its sheath. "You heard her. Now ride on." Her father looked at the faces around him. The ranch hands, the woman on the porch, the man who stood so still and sure, and something in him faltered. He spat into the dirt. "You're dead to me, girl," he said, and turned his horse. They rode off into the fading light. Lila stood frozen until the dust settled. Only then did she realize she was shaking not from fear, but from the strange release of it. Noah touched her shoulder lightly. "It's over," he said. She nodded, tears finally breaking free, and for the first time they felt like something worth shedding. The ranch settled into quiet after the confrontation, but something inside Lila stayed restless for days. She worked as usual, tending to her chores, smiling when spoken to, but at night she would sit by the window of her small room looking out at the dark line of hills. Each gust of wind through the cottonwoods brought back the sound of her father's voice, the glare in his eyes when he called her dead to him. She told herself it no longer mattered, yet some part of her still mourned the man he had been before grief and whiskey had hollowed him out. One evening after supper, Noah found her behind the barn sitting on the edge of the water trough with her feet dangling. He said nothing at first, just stood beside her, arms folded, watching the fireflies blink above the pasture. "You were brave," he said finally. "I don't know about brave," she murmured. "I was just tired of running." "That's often what courage looks like," Noah said. "Doing what you have to, even when your knees want to give out." Lila smiled faintly. "My knees definitely wanted to give out." He chuckled and the sound was low and warm. He sat down beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "You can stop looking over it now," he said. "He won't come back. I know, I just never thought I'd see him turn away." Noah studied her profile in the dim light. "Sometimes walking away is the only mercy a man has left to give," he said. "Maybe someday you'll forgive him enough to find peace." She looked at him surprised. "Do you think that's possible?" His gaze drifted to the horizon. "I think forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. It's what lets you move on." His words stayed with her long after he left. That night as she lay under the thin quilt, she whispered to herself that she forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved to be free. And for the first time since she'd run, sleep came, without dreams of the cellar. The weeks that followed carried the ranch into summer. The grass thickened, the river shrank to a trickle, and the air shimmered with heat. Lila worked beside Mrs. Callahan in the kitchen, baking bread that filled the house with a sweet, yeasty smell, and sewing curtains for the windows. Her laughter came more easily now. Sometimes she caught herself humming while she worked and stopped startled at the sound, as if remembering laughter was something that belonged to someone else. Noah still visited the house, often bringing supplies or fixing small things that didn't truly need fixing. Mrs. Callahan watched the way his eyes followed Lila without saying a word, but there was a knowing curve to her mouth whenever he appeared. One Sunday after church, the ranch hands organized a picnic by the creek. Mrs. Callahan sent Lila with a basket of biscuits and preserves. She hesitated, unsure if she belonged among them, but Noah was already there, waving her over. "You look like you stepped right out of the morning sun," he said when she joined him, his grin teasing but shy around the edges. "I think you're just trying to get another biscuit," she replied, hiding her smile. He laughed, "Maybe both." They spent the afternoon under the shade of oaks, watching the water glint between the stones. Laughter carried through the air, harmonicas clapping hands, a few rough voices trying to keep time with a song. It felt to Lila like a world reborn. As the sun began to set, the crowd drifted back toward the ranch, leaving Lila and Noah walking slowly along the creek. Dragonflies hovered low, their wings catching the fading light. "Mrs. Callahan says you're one of her best workers," Noah said. "Says you've a head for figures and a hand for bread." She laughed softly. "I'll take that as the highest praise. It is coming from her." They walked in silence for a few paces. Then Noah stopped and turned to face her. "I've been thinking," he said. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled, then grew serious. "I've seen you fight for your life, Lila. I've seen you start over with nothing but a will to survive. And I've come to realize I don't want to see another sunrise without knowing you're safe." The words hung between them, simple and unpolished, but they struck something deep inside her. She felt her breath catch. "Noah," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. You deserve time to find your footing." She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the one that disappeared beneath his stubble. "Maybe I've already found it," she said quietly. His eyes searched hers, uncertain, hopeful. Then slowly he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Their first kiss was not rushed. It came like something inevitable. The meeting of two souls who had already shared danger, silence, and the long road toward trust. When it ended, they stayed close, the air around them, thick with warmth and promise. "I've wanted to do that since the day I found you." Noah said, his voice rough. Even when I was a mess of dirt and blood. Especially then. You looked like the bravest thing I'd ever seen. She laughed softly, leaning her forehead against his chest. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a new rhythm, one made of quiet mornings and small smiles. Sometimes they rode together at dusk, Ember leading the way across the rolling hills. Sometimes they talked about the past, his sister, her mother. But more often they talked about the future, the kind of life they wanted to build, the kind of home that would never know locked doors or raised voices. Late that summer, when the air smelled of rain and cut hay, Noah asked Mrs. Callahan for a piece of land near the East Creek. He started building there, after work, hammer echoing through the twilight. He wouldn't tell Lila what he was making, only smiled when she asked. "You'll see soon enough," he said. And though she didn't know it yet, each plank he lifted, each nail he drove, was a promise, one that would soon reshape both their lives. By late October, the evenings turned cooler and the air carried the scent of mesquite smoke drifting from ranch chimneys. Lila noticed that Noah often disappeared after supper, taking Ember and a bundle of tools. Sometimes she would see a faint light flickering far off beyond the eastern pasture and wonder what he was doing out there. He never said much, only gave a half smile and told her not to worry. Mrs. Callahan seemed to know more than she let on. Whenever Lila asked, the older woman would just hum to herself and change the subject. "Patience, child," she'd say, rolling out dough. "Some things ripen better when you let them be." Still, curiosity grew inside Lila. She had learned to live without fear, but waiting without answers was its own kind of ache. So one evening, when the sun hung low and the sky bled orange into purple, she followed the faint line of fence posts leading east. She found him on a rise overlooking the creek, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hammer swinging in a steady rhythm. Before him stood the outline of a small cabin, walls nearly complete, roof, half-shingled, smoke curling from a temporary fire pit. He didn't notice her at first, and she watched him move, every motion certain and deliberate. It was the same surety that had lifted her from the ground months ago, the same quiet strength that had made her believe safety might not be a myth. "What are you building?" she finally asked. Noah turned, startled but smiling. "Well, the surprise is ruined," he said, setting the hammer aside. "I wanted to show you when it was finished." "A house," she guessed, stepping closer. "Ours," he said softly. The word hung in the fading light. She froze, unsure if she had heard right. "Ours." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been saving my pay for years. Mr. Callahan offered me this plot near the creek. Said a man ought to build something of his own someday. I didn't know what that meant until I met you." Lila's breath caught. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come see it when it's done," he said gently. "Say you'll think about staying." She took another step, close enough to see the fine dust of sawed wood clinging to his arms. "Noah, you already gave me a place to stay," she said. "Maybe what I've been looking for all along wasn't just safety. Maybe it was this." They stood like that for a long time, the wind stirring the tall grass around them. Then he reached for her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "I'll finish the roof by then." When she returned the next day, the cabin stood complete, a small house with a porch wrapping around two sides, smoke already puffing from the chimney. Noah waited by the gate, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He led her inside. The interior smelled of pine and oil. A handmade table stood near the window, two chairs beside it. A quilt sewn by Mrs. Callahan lay folded on the bed. In the corner, a shelf held a few simple dishes and a lantern polished to a shine. "It isn't much," Noah said quietly, "but it's built strong. I'd like it to be yours." She turned to him, eyes bright with disbelief. "Noah, you can't mean—" "I can," he interrupted. "I built it for you, and for me. I can't promise much, but I can promise to keep building, to keep trying for as long as you'll let me." From his pocket, he drew a small gold band. It caught the afternoon light, plain but warm. "Lila Rowan," he said, voice steady though his hands trembled a little. "Will you marry me?" Her heart seemed to stop, then race all at once. Tears filled her eyes before she could even speak. "Yes," she whispered the word, catching on a sob. "Yes, no avail, I will." He smiled, then the kind of smile that reached his eyes and softened every rough edge. Slipping the ring onto her finger, he pulled her close, and their kiss tasted of wood smoke and sunlight, and every promise they hadn't dared to dream before. When they finally pulled apart, he said, "Come see your home." They walked through each small room together, his hand brushing hers. She touched the walls as if afraid they might vanish. "It's perfect," she said. They were married 2 weeks later at Ridge Hollow. The ceremony was simple, held beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. Mrs. Callahan stood as witness, the ranch hands and their wives gathered in a loose circle, faces bright with smiles. Someone played a fiddle. Someone else brought pies. Noah wore his best shirt boots polished to a dull shine. Lila's dress was one of Mrs. Callahan's old ones, altered and trimmed with lace from a curtain. When she walked toward him, the breeze lifting her hair, Noah forgot to breathe for a moment. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Noah did gently, reverently, like sealing a prayer. Afterward, they ate, laughed, and danced until stars appeared above the valley. It felt as though the world itself had widened to make space for their joy. Later, when the guests drifted home and the lanterns burned low, Noah lifted Lila onto Ember and led her to the little house by the creek. The moonlight painted the water silver as he carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he whispered. That night, lying beside him in the quiet, Lila listened to the crickets outside and thought of the girl she had been, the one running barefoot through dust and pain, and how impossible this peace would have seemed to her. She touched the ring on her finger, felt its cool weight, and knew that sometimes the road out of darkness leads not to escape, but to belonging. The winter that followed came early and hard, sweeping across the valley with sharp winds and skies the color of steel. Snow dusted the roof of their small house by the creek, but inside warmth gathered in the scent of firewood and stew simmering on the stove. Noah would rise before dawn each morning, pulling on his coat and hat, while Lila stirred beneath the blankets half awake. He'd lean down, kiss her forehead, and whisper back before dark love. She never quite stopped worrying until she saw him return, horse steaming and boots coated in mud. Each evening he brought the cold in with him, and she would chase it away with food and laughter. She learned how to mend saddle straps, how to patch shirts, how to bake biscuits soft enough that the other ranch hands swore no one could match them. Sometimes when the chores were done, she'd sit by the fire and sew while Noah whittled wood into small figurines. Horses, birds, a tiny fox he said looked just like her. It was the kind of life she had once thought belonged only to stories whispered to children. In February, during a rare spell of mild weather, the creek thawed enough for its steady trickle to return. One afternoon, while Lila was tending the fire, she heard the distant echo of hooves. 2 riders approached along the ridge road, and when they drew close, she froze, the ladle slipping from her fingers. Noah stepped out onto the porch, his hand instinctively near his holster. As the riders came into view, Lila saw their faces, and her breath caught. Jacob and Daniel, her brothers. They halted a few yards away, dismounting slowly, hats in hand. The older of the two, Jacob, spoke first. "We came to see Lila," he said, "to make sure she's all right." Lila stepped out beside Noah, her pulse racing. "I'm fine," she said, her voice cautious. "Better than fine." Daniel looked away, ashamed. "Pa's dead," he said quietly. "Pneumonia took him last month." The words landed with an unexpected weight. Though she had long cut herself off from him, the finality of it still struck her. She lowered her gaze, the wind lifting strands of hair from her face. "I see," she said. "I'm sorry for your loss." "There's more," Jacob continued. "The farm's ours now. We're trying to keep it going, but we don't rightly know how." He hesitated. "We were hoping maybe you could come by, show us what you remember, help us get started again." Noah looked at her, waiting for her answer without a word. Lila studied her brothers, the same faces that had once turned away from her cries in the cellar. Yet now they looked younger, somehow lost. "I can't come back there to live," she said softly. "But I can visit. I'll help where I can." Jacob's shoulders slumped with relief. "Thank you, Lila. Truly." Noah's tone eased. "You boys look cold. Come in, get something warm to eat." They hesitated but followed, stamping snow from their boots. Over dinner, the tension gradually thinned. The brothers told stories of the neighboring farms, of trying and failing to keep the livestock through the frost, of realizing too late how much their sister had done to hold the house together. Leela listened, torn between sorrow and vindication. After the meal, Daniel said quietly, "We thought Pa was always right, but seeing you now happy, maybe he wasn't right about everything." Leila reached across the table and touched his hand. "People can change," she said, "even if they start late." The brothers spent the night sleeping by the fire, and in the morning when they rode away, a fragile peace seemed to trail in their wake. As their figures disappeared over the ridge, Noah wrapped an arm around Leila's shoulders. "You sure about going back there for a visit?" She nodded. "I need to see it with my own eyes. Maybe it'll stop being the place that haunts me." They rode out together the following week. The farm looked smaller than she remembered, the fields overgrown, and the barn leaning to one side. The house still stood weathered but stubborn against time. She walked through each room slowly, her fingers grazing the cracked walls, the cold stone of the cellar door. The ghosts that had lived there all these years seemed quieter now, their voices fading in the daylight. She showed her brothers how to organize supplies, how to store grain, how to keep a kitchen running through winter. They listened carefully, almost reverently, as if trying to rewrite the past with every note they took. When it was time to leave, Jacob pressed a small wooden box into her hands. "It belonged to Ma," he said. "We figured you should have it." Inside were trinkets from their mother's life buttons, a locket and a folded scrap of fabric embroidered with her initials. "Thank you," Lila whispered. "I thought these were gone." Riding home, the sky stretched wide above them, pale blue against the gold of dying grass. Noah reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "You did good," he said. She smiled. "So did they. Maybe we all did in our own way." Spring came early that year. Wildflowers painted the plains, and the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. One morning, as Lila kneaded dough at the table, she paused, one hand pressed to her stomach. Something inside her shifted, a flutter so faint she thought she'd imagined it. Later that day, she went to see the doctor in town. When she returned, her cheeks were pink with joy. She set the table for supper, placing a small pair of knitted booties beside Noah's plate, white wool, soft and tiny. He came in smelling of horse and sweat, saw the table, then the booties. For a moment, he only stared. "Lila." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby." The words seemed to light his whole face. He caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet, laughing and crying all at once. "Our baby," he said into her hair. "Our family." That night, lying together beneath the soft hum of crickets, he placed his hand over her stomach and whispered a promise so quiet she almost didn't hear. "You'll never know fear like we did. You'll know love first and always." And Lila, smiling in the dark, whispered back, "That's why I love you." The months that followed were the gentlest either of them could remember. The land itself seemed to soften in sympathy, the rains steady but kind, the grass tall and green along the creek. Noah worked longer hours now, determined to finish a small addition to their house and nursery, with a window facing east so the child could wake to morning light. Lila spent her days sewing tiny clothes from old fabric and helping Mrs. Callahan with lighter chores. Every evening, Noah returned covered in sawdust, and she would tease him that their baby would think his father was made of wood and sunshine. By late summer, the walls of the nursery were painted a soft cream, the floor covered with a handmade rug Mrs. Callahan had woven. Jacob and Daniel came to visit, bringing a cradle carved from the oak that had once stood near their mother's garden. Lila cried when she saw it, running her hands over the smooth edges. "We wanted something of hers to be here," Jacob said. "She would have liked this," Daniel added quietly. As the days grew shorter, Lila moved more slowly. Noah fussed over her endlessly, checking the fire, fetching water, insisting she rest. "You're worrying too much." She'd laugh. "People have babies every day." "Not my people," he'd reply, setting down another log. "Not my world." When November came, so did the storms. One night, as the wind howled outside and rain battered the windows, the pains began. They came fast, sharp, unstoppable. Noah saddled Ember in a panic, ready to ride for help. But the creek had flooded, the bridge gone under. "Stay," Lila gasped, clutching his hand. "Please." He did. He lit every lantern in the house, fetched towels, boiled water, his heart pounding so loud he could barely hear her voice. By dawn, the storm had broken, and with it came the sound that changed everything. A newborn's cry, thin and fierce as birdsong. Mrs. Callahan, who had arrived just before midnight, placed the tiny bundle in Noah's trembling hands. "You have a daughter?" she said, smiling through her exhaustion. Lila lay back against the pillows, pale but radiant. "Meet your father," she whispered, and Noah bent down, unable to speak. He traced one fingertip along the baby's cheek, amazed by the perfection of her tiny face, the dusting of dark hair, the impossible smallness of her fingers curling around his thumb. "She's beautiful," he managed, "and she's you." They named her Anna Margaret for his sister, and for the woman who had saved them both in her quiet, practical way. The ranch hands built a small wooden cross near the creek, carving her name into it as a sign of blessing. Not sorrow, just something to mark the beginning of a new story. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and tender mornings. Lila learned the rhythm of her daughter's breathing, the soft weight of her head against her chest. Noah rose early as always, but before leaving, he would kneel by the crib whispering promises to the tiny soul who had made them a family. By spring, Anna was crawling across the rug, pulling herself up on the edge of the table, while Lila baked or sewed. Sometimes Noah would come in from the fields to find them both bathed in sunlight, his wife humming an old tune, the baby swaying in rhythm. He'd stand there quietly, afraid that any word might break the spell. 2 years later, they had a son, Patrick Henry Quiet, where Anna was bold content to sit on his father's knee and watch the fire. The following year, twin girls arrived, Sarah and Elizabeth, bringing noise, laughter, and chaos that filled every corner of the house. Their home grew along with them. Noah added another room, then a second story. Lila started baking pies for the ranch hands, then for the town, until word spread and people began coming from miles away for her bread and her kindness. Mrs. Callahan called her the heart of the valley, and everyone else agreed. The years passed steady as the seasons. Ridge Hollow changed hands when old Mr. Callahan retired, naming Noah his foreman and later his partner. The ranch prospered under his care, and Lila's kitchen became a gathering place for travelers, neighbors, and drifters who needed a warm meal and a bit of human grace. When their eldest Anna turned 16, she was already an expert rider, as fearless as her father and as gentle as her mother. One summer afternoon, Lila watched from the porch as Anna galloped across the open field, hair streaming behind her like sunlight, and she felt a swell of pride so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. That night, as the family gathered around the table, Anna announced she wanted to learn the trade from her father to manage the ranch, not just ride it. Noah laughed, but his voice cracked with pride. "Looks like I'll have to build another barn," he said. Time, like the river, moved forward. The twins grew into young women. Patrick found his calling in caring for the animals, and Lila found new peace in her garden. Her hands still strong, though silver threaded her hair. One evening near their 20th anniversary, Noah took her hand after dinner and led her out to the barn. He lit a lantern and showed her something hanging on the wall, a shadow box made of glass and oak. Inside were two worn scraps of leather tied with frayed string. "You kept them," she said softly. Noah nodded. "The shoes I made you that first day in the cabin. I wanted to remember where we started." Lila touched the glass, her fingers trembling. "I used to think that day was the worst of my life," she whispered. "Now I see it was the day everything began." He smiled, drawing her into his arms. "Sometimes God hides miracles in the dust," he said. They walked back toward the house, hand in hand. The stars were scattered thick above them, the creek whispering its endless song. Lila looked at the windows glowing warm against the dark and thought of the girl she once was, barefoot, terrified, running through an unforgiving land, and how far those feet had carried her. She turned to Noah and smiled. "We built something good, didn't we?" "We built home," he said simply. And as they stood there in the quiet of their land, the night spread wide around them, holding every piece of their journey, the pain, the courage, the grace of survival, and the enduring truth that love once found could outlast any storm.